At the United Nations in New York, demonstrators reflect the chain reaction of tension as the Security Council prepares to debate the Congo crisis. The boycott of Dag Hammarskjöld by the Soviet Union and its demand for withdrawal of UN troops from the Congo are pressing matters of the moment. Mr. Hammarskjöld is to stand firm, informing Russia he will not be driven out of his post, that he means to stay as long as he's needed. Then the Council hears American Ambassador Adlai Stevenson defend the Secretary General and the UN Congo peace effort.
We believe that the only way to keep the Cold War out of the Congo is to keep the United Nations in the Congo. And we call on the Soviet Union to join us in thus ensuring the free and untrammeled exercise by the Congolese people of their right to independence and to democracy.
Soon afterwards comes the violently unexpected. A demonstration breaks out in the spectators' gallery, interrupting Mr. Stevenson. Officials call it the worst outbreak to occur at the UN, touched off as if on cue by rioters who are joined by others who burst through the doors from the corridor outside. News of the Day camera records the tumult that ensued.
She's in the middle of the screen. There she is. She's obscured by the letters now. There she is. Right below the 62.
Finally, with the wild demonstration quelled, Mr. Stevenson said,
President, may I say that I deeply deplore this outrageous and obviously organized demonstration. To the extent that Americans may have been involved, I apologize on behalf of my government to the members of the Security Council.
Later the same day at his Washington news conference, President Kennedy meets the Congo issue with firmness, adding the prestige of his high office to support for the United Nations, pledging defense of the Charter by opposing any government's unilateral action in the Congo.
The United States has supported and will continue to support the United Nations' presence in the Congo. The United States considers that the only legal authority entitled to speak for the Congo as a whole is a government established under the Chief of State, President Kasavubu, who has been seated in the General Assembly of the United Nations by a majority vote of its members. The United Nations offers the best, if not the only possibility, for the restoration of conditions of stability and order in the Congo.
The UN upheld at a new hour of crisis.
Okay, well, that's a very interesting bit of filmmaking. Lumumba's death was, this event was the front page headline of the next day's New York Times, and the Congo crisis and the fate of Lumumba had been in the headlines for, for months before that. So this was a big deal, and that demonstration, captures the passion of black radicals, nationalists in Harlem and elsewhere. There were demonstrations in other major urban centers as well. Now, this was really a defining moment for the African-American expatriates in Ghana and their counterparts in Harlem and other cities. For northern African-Americans, they're certainly committed to and vested in the Southern Civil Rights Movement, but in many respects, they are equally committed to and concerned with African liberation movements, and certainly that clip is evidence of that as well. Now, and the Cold War framing was unmistakable in that film. And so the Ghana expatriates and their allies in the United States are posing a political challenge to U.S. Cold War dictates. We're not talking about a lot of people here, but this was a big deal, and this sparked a lot of comment in the press. And you saw Ambassador Adlai Stevenson sort of insinuating that this was a sort of left-wing communist organized demonstration, and this sparked a lot of speculation in the press. Well, what motivated these people to do this? They must be being mobilized by outside agitators or the Kremlin or something like that. But these folks were really critical of the gradualism of the civil rights movement and U.S. policy towards Africa, really critical of a double standard applied to the movement by U.S. officials and liberal opinion makers, demanding the movement's adherence to nonviolence while not doing enough to prevent or prosecute violent attacks by segregationist vigilantes and mobs. And one of the leading intellectuals in the African-American expatriate community in Ghana, Julian Mayfield, landed in Ghana, was exiled in Ghana after fleeing a federal manhunt for his involvement in an armed self-defense movement in North Carolina that had planned to match white supremacist attackers tit for tat. Mayfield and other black American activists were fleeing political repression in the U.S. as much as they were drawn to what they viewed as the revolutionary promise of Ghana. Now, what was at stake for these black Americans in Ghana? They're in this foreign country. They're working to support the government of Nkrumah and his aims of Pan-Africanism and continental unity, support for ongoing African liberation struggles. But they really, they're guests in the country. They don't have a lot to say about what goes on there politically. So for the expatriates and their allies in the U.S. during the 1960s, the stakes were this: what kind of citizens would African Americans be when the civil rights movement and civil rights legislation conferred formal equality on them? So they believed that Afro-Americans could define their U.S. citizenship in relation to African peoples and their ongoing struggles for liberation from foreign political and economic domination. So their view of U.S. citizenship, enacted at the UN demonstration in solidarity with African peoples, was influenced by a global anti-colonial and anti-imperialist alliance with the wretched of the earth. And this clashed directly with U.S. officialdom's prescriptive assertions that the American Negro was simply and strictly American, and that black Americans and Africans had such distinct histories that they were incompatible. Now, the most powerful exponent of the expatriates' view of a global African-American citizenship was Malcolm X, who later visited Ghana and lobbied African heads of state on behalf of African-Americans after he was forced out of the Nation of Islam. Now, in response to allegations in the press that those who took part in the demonstration at the UN were communist-inspired, they and their supporters insisted that the event signaled the advent of what they termed a new, uncompromising Afro-American nationalism, skeptical of the benefits of integration in the South and highly critical of U.S. policy towards Africa. And of particular concern to these Afro-American nationalists was the U.S. government's appeasement of the apartheid regime despite its violent, lethal suppression of nonviolent demonstrators. And so African-American expatriates who had emigrated to Ghana after 1961, and Mary mentioned Pauli Murray, who is another story, really not part of this sort of radical African-American expatriate community, but part of an earlier history of expatriates in Ghana who were recruited specifically because of their commitments to civil rights in the case of African Americans, or were recruited because they were anti-colonial and progressive, like Connor Cruz O'Brien, who had come to Ghana directly from the UN mission in the Congo.